In this video, you will learn what are hormones and what impact they actually have on our sleep, our emotions, on our libido, on our well-being, and on our physical performance. And if you discover that you have a deficiency, I will give you step-by-step plan on how you can rebalance it with food and simple lifestyle changes. So first, let's dive into a little bit of biochemistry so that you actually understand what are hormones. So hormones are chemical messengers that trigger a response. So it's like a lock and the key system. So not every lock fits the key. So that's also good because you, for example, don't want that the sex hormones are acting on your retina cells. Yeah. So we have different kind of hormones and we need different building blocks for them. So by the end of this video, you'll understand why you need to eat protein, why you need to eat fat. So first we look at the hormones insulin, oxytocin, melatonin, and serotonin that are actually made of amino acids, the protein. So insulin will be extremely important because that is helping to turn the glucose into energy. Oxytocin is a cuddle hormone. That's what we want to have in balance as well. Melatonin is a sleeping hormone. So if you want to have a good sleep, you need to have a building blocks for this hormone. And actually, the building block for melatonin is serotonin. Serotonin is a happy hormone, and 70% of that is created by our good bacteria in the intestine. So in week 3, we will dive deeper into this topic. So serotonin is a precursor, so it's a building block for melatonin. So if you are not happy, if you are under stress, you most probably have even problems with sleeping. And we will dive into how you can correct it. Then we have steroid hormones. So maybe when you hear about steroid hormones, you imagine those like anabolic hormones that the bodybuilders are pumping in. Some of them, yes. So these ones are made out of fat, cholesterol, which already tells you that we need to eat fat, omega-3 from fish, omega-6 from animal products like meat, or from dairy products, milk, cheese, and so on. The most important ones for us are estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So these are sex hormones, and it has impact on our femininity, but also masculinity. And even men and female have all these hormones, but in different levels, of course. Vitamin D is also a steroid hormone, and it's involved in 500 enzymatic reactions. So we need to be sure that we have enough of vitamin D. And of course, thyroid hormones. Very often you hear about all the autoimmune disease and the slow metabolism, and this is caused by the thyroid hormones. So now you know that steroid hormones and the fat is important to have a healthy levels of thyroid hormones. And of course, cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. And if it's using too much of the building blocks, then it's stealing away from the others like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And we will cover this topic as well. And then we have like other hormones, for example, amines, nitric oxide that improves the blood flow. And actually the manufacturers of Viagra are using nitric oxide. Yeah? But you can find it also in beetroot, so you don't need to use this pill. Prostaglandins are causing pain and inflammation. And then, for example, drugs such as ibuprofen and aspirin are just blocking this effect. But it doesn't mean that the hormones are removed from the body. They're just blocked by these drugs to numb the receptors. So you can see that these are the cells and they have receptors. So these are hormones and they need to attach to the receptor. So it's like a lock and the key system. And we will dive deeper into that in the next slide. So hormones are released into the bloodstream based on the negative feedback. So if something is missing in our body, if we, for example, get under stress, the body detects it and the brain will send the signals, for example, to adrenals to release the stress hormone cortisol. And cortisol then increases the blood pressure, pumps the heart much more, brings all the blood into legs and into arms and into brain, so that you can actually cope with the stressful situation, and you can run away from the tiger. Yeah? Unfortunately, this tiger is now in our life happening way too much, and we have cortisol levels high all day long. So this then causes the overload or sometimes even deficiency. So for example, burnout is a deficiency of the cortisol. The adrenals were no more able to produce cortisol. They were absolutely exhausted. And that's why prevention is crucial. So hormones are also released into the bloodstream based on the biological rhythm. So for example, melatonin, the sleeping hormone, gets released in the evening. When the darkness hits the retina in the eye, the serotonin gets turned into melatonin, and you can drift with ease into a profound sleep. The problem is, if you have high levels of cortisol, you will never make melatonin, because this would be against the nature. Cortisol is there to protect us from that danger. Yeah. So you cannot go to sleep if you are running away from the tiger. So what happens if we have misfiring hormones? So as you can see by now, hormones are either working together in synchrony or they're opposing each other. They're passing the messages. So these ones are, for example, neurotransmitters in the brain. And you can see it's like a domino effect. They pass the message from one to the other, to the other, to the other, so that the change happens in the body. So what can be actually the obstacles? Why are they sometimes misfiring? Why they don't pass the information? And this can be because there is wrong signaling. So one neurotransmitter, one cell is not really communicating with the other. You know, it's like in a relationship or at the workplace. If the employees or the people are not communicating clearly with each other, it can create a mess. So imagine I am a cell and you are sending me message and you send it in a wrong language. So I receive something like chung cha chang cha chang cha chang cha chung. Well, I don't understand this message. I don't know what you want from me. So I'm not going to do it. You maybe told me, go to sleep or create more hormones or warm up the body or make me feel satisfied. But I didn't get the message. I did not understand. Or maybe I am so exhausted, cell, because you were constantly bombarding me with the messages from the cortisol, and I just gave up. My battery is flat and I do not communicate. So I'm resisting. The communication is broken. So here is the cell. I want you to understand how the cells are working, because this will be in all the weeks. So every cell has a phospholipid bilayer. Lipid is fat. So you can see how much fat every cell has around it. And in this cell, in this fat, are embedded these receptors. Receptors are made out of protein. So for example, vegans, if they are not consuming all the spectrum, all the 23 amino acids, maybe they're not able to build these receptors in new cells. And therefore, the cells cannot receive the messages. So even if they have, for example, estrogen or cortisol or any other hormone running in the bloodstream, the cells just basically do not get the message and they cannot make you, I don't know, warm or happy or whatever. So these are the hormones, also protein, receptors, protein, fat, omega-3, cholesterol. So by now you understand that there is actually no carbohydrate, there is no sugar. Okay, there's some sugar, yes. We also have some receptors that need carbohydrates, but not as much. And we also said that our body is able to create sugar in a gluconeogenesis. So we do not need to consume so many carbohydrates. But it is absolutely crucial that you learn to eat sufficient amount of protein for your needs and sufficient amount of omega-3. And if you don't like eating fish, you still need to take supplements, even vegan supplements, vegan omega-3, DHA. So what is the consequence of misfiring hormones? So if we look first at the ladies first, you can see that if you have, for example, high insulin levels, maybe you have noticed that your arms are getting bigger than it used to be, and all that fat is stored there. Or if you are growing bigger breast than you always used to have, and maybe you have sore breast during the period, maybe you are suffering with endometriosis or fibroids, maybe you have polycystic ovarian syndrome or infertility problems, you might be suffering with high estrogen levels or low estrogen levels. Maybe you are growing a belly fat. So this would be high insulin. It would be low growth hormone. Maybe you are not sleeping enough. Maybe you are not relaxing and recovering as much as you should. Or maybe you are under stress. You have chronic high levels of cortisol. That is also not serving you well. Let's look at the men. Maybe you have noticed that you are growing the man boobs, and maybe your nipples are enlarging. Maybe you have this beer belly fat, even though you are not drinking beer. So this would be the sign of low testosterone. And testosterone is extremely important for men. And we will have a separate presentation on this video. So check that out. Maybe you also have high insulin levels and low DHEA. So DHEA is a fountain of youth. This is a hormone that with age is decreasing, and you can see this number in your blood test results and see where you stand. Also, this belly fat, it's again insulin and estrogen, because men, if they have low levels of testosterone, they actually have higher levels of estrogen, the dominating feminine hormone. Larger hips and so on. Let's look at insulin, because it's one of the most important hormones. And I want you to understand what it is actually making in the body. So in previous videos, you learned whether you are on the blood glucose roller coaster or not. So let's repeat this. Glucose gets very easily into the bloodstream, especially the simple sugars. So if you are eating biscuits and cake and drinking Coke and beer, or eating white bread, white pasta, all of this gets into the bloodstream in seconds. And our body detects when the glucose levels go up, because glucose is actually toxic. We do not want to have it in the bloodstream for way too long. So this negative feedback loop sends the signal to the brain, and the brain, the master, sends a signal to pancreas and says, please release insulin, the anabolic hormone, the fat maker, because that needs to help to transport glucose into the cells, because glucose on its own cannot enter. So these blue balls, that is insulin, and insulin comes to the receptors, protein receptors, knocks on the door and says, hello cell, please open the door, I have glucose for you. So the cell will open the door, the glucose comes in, and in this powerhouse, the mitochondria, the energy center, the glucose gets turned into ATP, the adenosine triphosphate, the currency, the money, the dollars, if everything works well. But you know what can happen? Insulin resistance. Resistance, what the cells are doing. So We have eaten a large cake with a Coke, with a coffee, and the bloodstream gets flooded with these red balls of glucose. So lots and lots of insulin comes in, knocks on the door, but the cell still has quite a lot of balls in the energy center and says, I'm not going to open the door because I still have quite a lot of work. Don't overload me. And locks. And the insulin says, but hey, I need your help because my job is to remove the glucose out of the bloodstream. That is dangerous. But the cell is resisting. Our body sends the signal that the blood glucose levels are extremely high. And the master in the brain says, hey, pancreas, release a little bit more insulin because we are really getting into danger. So more insulin comes into the bloodstream, which causes hyperinsulinemia, and it's exhausting the pancreas. It's working so hard, but nothing happens. So all that blood, as it's circulating through the body, comes to the liver. Liver says, okay, I'm going to take it, but I have nowhere to store it. I'm going to turn it into fat, and let's send it in the bloodstream into the fat cells and ask them to accept it. So this is what happens in our body. The liver, as you can see, all the fat cells in here is also overloaded with fat. And then it gets exhausted. The last thing we want is to exhaust all of our organs, and especially fructose, because it's bypassing the process, gets always stored in the liver, and it's causing fatty liver disease. Then, okay, let's say that the liver turned it all into fat, and now the fat is traveling in the blood, but on its way, it gets stuck, and it's creating this plaque, which is very dangerous for the cardiovascular disease. Because you know what? We don't see it. Maybe you go to the doctor and you discover that you have high blood pressure. Why is it so? Because the vessels are getting narrower and narrower. The blood is actually blocked by the fat and it cannot go. So the blood pressure needs to be increased so that it can push the blood into your brain so that you can actually focus and concentrate and function. It's such a fatigue for the body. And by that time, you are exhausted. And you can actually even see it in your blood test results. Your cholesterol levels are high. Your triglycerides are high because the fat from the sugar is not getting stored in the cells as fast as you would want. So don't worry. Now I know this also sounds so scary, but we can totally change this. I had so many clients that within 6 weeks improved their cholesterol levels, decreased their blood sugar levels, and the blood pressure. They even stopped taking the medication for the blood pressure, so the statins, even for the pre-diabetic states, the metformin. So with food, you can make a massive change. Now you are asking, but do I actually suffer with the insulin resistance? So let's say if you eat the food and you make the insulin, but the cells are resisting, the sugar gets stored as a fat and you still feel hungry because the energy was not created. So if you do not feel really satisfied after eating, and after 2 hours you kind of have a sugary craving or another carbohydrate craving, even though you had lunch, you might be suffering with the insulin resistance, because in this circle, the cortisol goes up. This is a very stressful situation for the body. The glucose is high, the insulin is high, everything goes off the wagon. Ghrelin, the hormone, hunger hormone, is getting up because the signals of satisfaction are not coming. So it's triggering the signal to you, go and eat and eat and eat. And then you are in a vicious circle. So you can look at the questionnaire that you will find in the folder, and you can see if the blood glucose insulin levels, which is this one, if you, for example, find it hard to concentrate, if you are weak and dizzy, if you are craving sugar, or insulin resistant metabolic syndrome, if you suffer with polycystic ovarian syndrome, high blood pressure, anything like this. So these are the signs that your blood glucose is in danger, that you might be suffering with the metabolic syndrome, and that you want to take some action. So take your time before we watch the next video and go through this question.